Hey, 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 everyone. It's Naomi Wolf here in the South Bronx. As promised, I'm doing a video due to the extreme engagement on social media, especially on Twitter, with Australians who are under appalling apocalyptic assault, as you know, from the wildfires that are consuming millions of acres, and the last estimate I saw was 1 billion innocent animals, 28 people at least missing or dead, countless homes and businesses and schools in an absolute maelstrom. And many of you have been following these reports, so I won't recap extensively. I'll go right to why we're doing this video tonight. I found, and at the same time, another activist in Australia found evidence that there has been an agreement in place for 20 years between the United States of America, a superpower, Australia, and New Zealand to help each other in a crisis, specifically with wildfires, and to provide the equipment, the personnel, the planes, the crisis support that is needed, because each of these countries has wildfires. So this is important because, as many of you know, we've confirmed that 6 countries, actually latest count 7 countries, have offered help to Australia with firefighting, and this help has not been accepted, except very minimally to date. With public pressure, more and more firefighters and equipment from other countries are being allowed into Australia. But as you know, I called Scott Morrison's office yesterday and had a long talk with Kieran, his communications director or staffer, and President Macron of France offered assistance in early December, and to date, Kieran could not confirm that that assistance had been accepted, let alone implemented. New Zealand has offered assistance, and there was a statement from the Prime Minister of New Zealand that she would give the help that was needed. And only now this week are 2 divisions of engineers being allowed in from New Zealand, and so much more is needed. The United States, as I mentioned, has this agreement. And on page 4, it says all the help you need is available to Australia, to the partners, to New Zealand, and vice versa, in a wildfire. I just was told that Italy had offered help, and it had not yet been accepted. There was a statement from the Canadian environmental minister saying that they stand by to help Australia, but they have to be asked. Again, this was said diplomatically, politely, to avoid an international incident, but as I said in my last video, you can't just show up in a country. You have to be asked. And what is clear, we confirmed it with Kieran in the Prime Minister's parliamentary office, that help has not been accepted, except in a very, very minimal way. So John Dee, a renowned environmentalist in Australia, has brought up the question of the fact that 8 water bombers are standing by with U.S. Forestry Service. These could douse the wildfires that cannot be managed right now, or they could go so far in helping. And these have not been requisitioned. And I understand from a source that the U.S. Forestry Service has confirmed that they have not been asked for these 8 water bombers that are just sitting there while Australia burns, and the smoke is going all over the globe. It's staining the alpine region of New Zealand brown. It's reached South America as of just this evening. It's truly an environmental catastrophe of apocalyptic proportions. And there's one man who is not allowing these many countries, also Micronesia, also Papua New Guinea, all of these countries have offered assistance. And to date, there are 100 firefighters from the US, about 50 from Canada. Pressure is on Scott Morrison, so he's saying that he's accepting more. But really, there are 29,000 firefighters in the United States. There are now 7 countries waiting to send personnel, planes, equipment, and it is baffling many people why Scott Morrison hasn't said absolutely please come to everyone. But the important question has been raised. Well, you can't just liaise with people you've never worked before, and there's truth to that, of course, as anyone who's been in a conflict area knows. However, that's why I keep going back and back to this agreement, because Australia and the United States and New Zealand have been working together, putting out each other's fires since 2000, 20 years ago. They've developed procedures, they've developed protocols, their teams know each other, they have coordination structures, and I promise, because at DailyClout we don't just opine or spin, we read the primary documents because we respect you. In a democracy, that's what citizens should have access to, is primary documents. Well, the firefighting agreement that I've been reporting on so assiduously has vanished from the internet since yesterday. At least I can't find it in the same searches that I used that did locate it up till yesterday. So I'm going to set that aside, but I found something just as revealing, in some ways more revealing, and that is a document from an International Firefighters Association from 2003 that tells the story of how this agreement to help each other was put in place, and then shows that year after year after year after year, the US went to put out Australia's fires, Australia went to put out US's fires, everyone went to put out New Zealand's fires, and that they have deeply, deeply established agreements and relationships to do this at the highest levels. So now I'm going to read this to you. This will break your heart. International arrangements. It's from the International Forest Fire News, number 29, July to December 2003. So this is a press release or a newsletter for the global firefighters community. And I really love such documents because primary documents from inside a community of professionals really are very revealing about what's really going on, and they're obviously not mediated through a media lens. So this is called International Arrangements on the Sharing of Wildland Fire Suppression Resources between the United States of America and Australia and New Zealand. So it tells the background, and it's like a story. It's very well written. The wildland fire season in the United States during 2000 was the worst fire season in more than 50 years. Almost 100,000 fires consumed more than 2.8 million hectares of forest and range lands. This was approximately twice the US 10-year average. The season was long and difficult, and firefighters faced dangerous burning conditions throughout the Western United States. At the height of the fire season in late August, the U.S. Interagency Wildland Fire Community, which consists of federal, state, and local resources, had mobilized more than 20,000 civilian firefighters, approximately 4,000 soldiers and Marines, and thousands of other support personnel in dispatch centers, warehousing facilities, and administrative centers throughout the country. So I'm just pausing to say, this is 20 years ago, and they had between 20 and 25,000 people highly trained to put out these fires. So 20 years later, the last statistic I mentioned was 29,000 firefighters in the United States, plus all of these support services standing by for Australia. Faced with this unprecedented situation and with a forecast for a continuing hot and dry weather pattern, fire managers realized they would need to reach beyond U.S. borders for assistance. During the remainder of the 2000 fire season, the U.S. received assistance from more than 1,200, listen to the numbers, and this is 20 years ago, more than 1,200 Canadian firefighters, 96 fire specialists from Australia and New Zealand, and 20 Mexican firefighters. These additional resources performed important roles in the U.S. firefighting efforts. So you guys have saved us, Australia. In 2000, you sent your firefighters to be in harm's way, and we had 1,200 firefighters from Canada and New Zealand sent firefighters as well in this agreement to help us. And others performed as middle managers on incident management teams. International agreements with Canada and Mexico were in place prior to the 2000 fire season, but none existed with Australia and New Zealand. So this is telling the story of how this agreement came to be. Things were so out of control with fires in the United States and the West in 2000 that it was more than Canada, Mexico, and the US could manage. So they asked for help from Australia and New Zealand. Australia and New Zealand said, yes, we will do it. And they all worked together successfully. But there was a problem because there wasn't an agreement to protect Australia and New Zealand yet. So this next paragraph says, why did the US go to Australia and New Zealand? US fire managers have had informal study group exchanges with Australia and New Zealand for more than 20 years. So this was written in 2003. That means that these relationships go back 40 years, right? Or 37 years. These exchanges provided opportunities to share information about each other's programs and experiences. So Australia and the United States have been studying firefighting management together for 4 decades, all right? Based on that exchange relationship and the knowledge of the Australian and New Zealand firefighting systems, when the US fire situation reached a critical level in 2000, the US approached Australia and New Zealand and asked for their help. The 96 fire experts that came to the US were integrated into the US firefighting organization, where they served in middle management positions on fires, freeing up US fire managers to take on more critical tasks. So you see how successfully and urgently this can be done. The Australian firefighters came to the US and took over middle management roles, desk roles, basically, so that the firefighters in the US who understood their own landscape could be freed up to not be sitting at their desks and not be dealing with bureaucratic tangles and not be dealing with things that other people can do. It's a very wise use of resources. So again, Australia saved the United States in the year 2000 from out-of-control fires. The relationship in 2000. The justification for seeking the assistance of Australia and New Zealand in 2000 was based on an assumption that a U.S. public law called the Wildfire Suppression Assistance Act gave the authority to the U.S. Secretaries of the Interior and Agriculture. So these are the people who administer this law. It's an existing law. It's an American law, right? So this is at the highest federal level of our government, to enter into assistance agreements, especially because of the critical situation facing fire managers on the fire lines. U.S. fire managers who coordinated this activity during 2000 did not understand the clearance and vetting processes required by the U.S. Department of State prior to putting Australia and New Zealand firefighters in harm's way on the fire lines. Fortunately, no serious incidents occurred, and all of the Australian and New Zealand firefighters returned home safely. Thank God, from all accounts, they performed ably and were a credit to their countries. So, to translate a bit, though this is very clearly written, of course, when you bring foreigners to fight a fire or do something really critical domestically with environmental help or humanitarian help, there are legal hurdles. They could do everything right and perfectly in the field, but the legal hurdles include you have to clear them with the Secretary of State, right, for security reasons, and also there's legal exposure. What if someone gets hurt? So that explains why this agreement was more formalized subsequently. So when the 2000 fire season was over, US fire managers understood that the assumed authority used to bring Australia and New Zealand firefighters over would not be viable in the future. And the biggest issue that arose was a concern about tort claim liability, people getting hurt. Solicitors and risk managers from Australia and New Zealand, upon review of US law, did not feel that their firefighters were provided sufficient legal coverage by the US. If an Australian or New Zealand firefighter, even properly performing his duties, was involved in unforeseen fire line incidents which caused injury or damage to the other parties. So new arrangements needed to be developed and signed by all parties before the US could once again request and receive help from Australia and New Zealand. So you get what that is. It's realizing, wow, these guys could get sued if someone gets hurt by their even proper actions protecting the United States from fire. So then things get really, really interesting. And sorry, I'm sitting on the floor, so I just have to move a bit. The 2001 Christmas fires in southeastern Australia. This will blow your mind. We've been here before, not as bad, but we've been here before, and there was a solution. The devastating fires around Sydney and other areas of Southeast Australia in 2001, like the US fires in 2000, drew worldwide attention. The US, trying to return the favor of help that it received in 2000, offered to provide some assistance. Thanks to a break in the weather, the professionalism of their own firefighters, and the incorporation of some lessons learned from their experiences in the US in 2000, Australian fire managers were able to control their fires. However, had US help been needed, the ability and timeliness of the US to provide assistance would have been greatly hampered by the lack of signed agreements and operating plans. This once again highlighted the need for the completion of more formal arrangements and protocols between the countries, which would meet the concerns of all parties. So to translate again a bit, near Sydney was burning in 2001. The world's attention was focused on out-of-control wildfires in Australia. The US was standing by to help. Ultimately, Australian firefighters did not need their help because of a break in the weather and their own skills. But had they needed their help, everyone realized in order to really do this effectively, we need a formal agreement, we need training together, we need protocols. And this is where things really get formalized. The 2002 US fire season. After a quiet wildland fire season in 2001 in the US, the 2002 wildland fire season was just as challenging to fire managers as 2000. As conditions in the forests and rangelands of the western US worsened and record-setting hectares burned in several states, the US once again prepared to call for international assistance. So this thing of calling for help from your allies and friends when things are out of control with fire, it's not some new crazy notion that Scott Morrison has to figure out whether or not he wants to do. It's standard practice, and it has been since 2002 or earlier. Everyone calls on everyone for help. The United States prepared routinely, as things burned out of control in the West in 2002, to call on Australia for help. In other countries, however, Canada, which provided valuable and lengthy support to the US in 2000, faced its own fire problems stretching from Quebec to British Columbia, and there were still unresolved issues with arrangements and protocols with Australia and New Zealand. Through 2001 and up to August of 2002, Australian, US, and New Zealand fire managers, risk managers, and solicitors, okay, so the law has been on this since 2002 to make it legal, formalize it, had been proposing and reviewing potential options to solve the liability concerns raised after the 2000 fire season. One alternative that was explored was purchasing sufficient liability insurance to meet risk managers' requirements, but the cost was prohibitive and the policies would have been too complex. The best possible solution was to change US law that would give any international firefighter brought to the US under the, quote, Wildfire Suppression Assistance Act tort liability coverage equivalent to that provided to US government firefighters. In other words, translating, though you probably get it, this need to have an international response to out-of-control wildfires was so urgent that the quickest and most effective way to deal with it was to change United States law, which happened so that any firefighter coming to the US, any firefighter covered by this agreement, automatically gets the same protection from liability, the same protection from lawsuits, which is complete, that a firefighter in the United States gets. So it takes away the legal risk to brave firefighters from Australia and New Zealand to come to the US and vice versa. It clears every hurdle. So this is so painful to me to hear Scott Morrison's, or spokespeople say, well, there are complications. It's so complicated. because it was complicated in 2002. And that's why the United States government at the highest levels, along with their federal counterparts in Australia and New Zealand, got rid of the complications to the point of ensuring international firefighters at the same level as their own firefighters. So in early August, the bill was passed and signed by the President of the United States. The language in the bill provided the assurance required by Australian and New Zealand and US fire managers who were once again allowed to request international assistance from down under. Signatures of the Secretaries of Agriculture and the Interior were quickly inked on the official arrangement papers and posted overnight to Australia and New Zealand. This is like speeding this through, right? I read US laws every week. They don't get passed this fast. They don't get expedited this quickly, set in motion this quickly. This was fast-tracked through the process. Everyone was on board. The president signed it into law. And the Secretary of Agriculture signed it, inked it, and then the Australian states of Victoria, New South Wales, Tasmania, Western Australia, and South Australia and New Zealand signed the agreements. You guys signed it. It exists. Within a week of the passage of the legislation, 50 Australian and New Zealand fire specialists were on US fire lines filling, as they did in 2000, critical mid-level management fire positions in operations and aviation. I'm going to restate that again. Listen carefully, Australia. The Australian states of Victoria, New South Wales, Tasmania, Western Australia, and South Australia and New Zealand signed the arrangements. In other words, these states are burning. They already signed an arrangement with the President of the United States in US law, which is the US law to this day, to get help from America, to give help to America, to get help from New Zealand, to give help to New Zealand, and to be indemnified. It was signed by your people 18 years ago. Within a week of the passage, they were on the front lines. 2002, 2003 bushfire season in Australia. Now things get interesting because we have an agreement now. The 2002-2003 bushfire season in Australia saw some of the worst fires in over 50 years. The hardest hit states were Victoria and New South Wales. In later January of 2003, the state of Victoria requested US assistance. 36 US firefighters went to Australia for a month. A 20-person hand crew worked shoulder to shoulder with Australian firefighters on the fire line. An infrared scanning aircraft with crew and infrared photo interpreters were also sent. Okay, planes were sent. And 2 small incident management teams took on management responsibilities for portions of a massive fire in the Alpine region of Victoria. The US firefighters shared their knowledge and experience with their Australian counterparts and also gained a great deal of respect for the challenges facing Australian firefighters in the management and suppression of bushfires. This request for US assistance tested and solidified the two-way nature of the agreement signed in 2002. I'm almost done, but I think you understand why this is so important. There is no reason for these states to burn. There is no reason for these states to burn. All that is needed for all the resources of the United States of America, the 29,000 firefighters, the 8 planes to get to those states that are signatories, not at a federal level, at a state level, as well as a federal level of this agreement, is a phone call from Scott Morrison, Australia's Prime Minister. That is all that's required. The 2003 US wildland fire season. The 2003 wildland fire season initially did not appear that it would reach the proportions, but it did. For the 3rd time in 4 years, the US fire managers were facing the need for more international assistance, and Canada, as in much of 2002, was busy suppressing their own devastating fires. Once again, based on the 2002 arrangements, 40 Australian and New Zealand firefighters came to the aid of the US. The 2003 request reaffirmed the true value of being able to call upon Australian and New Zealand firefighters during extreme wildland seasons. It also began to seem routine. So I hope your head is exploding. It should. This is a scandal. This document by an International Firefighters Association was written in 2003. It's saying that already by 2003, there was a legally binding agreement in place signed by states in Australia, by New Zealand, by the President of the United States, and it was routine to call on each other's firefighters and planes and equipment. In 2003, other values of the arrangement. Instituting these arrangements not only provided for a clear mechanism to share firefighting resources during critical times, it also established formal procedures for cooperative exchanges outside of critical fire season time periods. Knowledge of each other's capabilities and systems before the fires start can pay important dividends in the heat of battle. I'm going to read that again because it is breaking my heart that I was on the phone with Scott Morrison's press spokesperson, Kieran, yesterday in his parliamentary office, and he was saying that they were dithering. He didn't say they were dithering. He could not give me an answer. He said discussions were ongoing for 5 weeks about getting international help. He couldn't answer any questions about this existing legally binding agreement for the United States to send all the help needed to Australia and vice versa. And he was using gibberish, bureaucracy speech, suggesting that it's all so complicated. It's way too complicated to get international firefighters or firefighters from US and New Zealand. And he also, I think, outrageously indicated or said that he couldn't tell me why this agreement hadn't been implemented or if a phone call had been made from Scott Morrison to Donald Trump asking for all the help that this agreement provides. Per law of the United States of America, signatories Australia and New Zealand, because these were, quote, private conversations. And this is so heartbreaking because, yes, it's complicated to bring firefighters over if they've never worked together. But I'm going to read that sentence again. It also established formal procedures for cooperative exchanges outside of critical fire season time periods, knowledge of each other's capabilities and systems before the fires start can pay important dividends in the heat of battle. So American firefighters already know Australian systems. Australian firefighters already know American systems. They have already studied together, exchanged together knowledge, exchanged together protocols, worked together. And I'm looking at a document that is 2 decades old. Okay, so it is nonsense. It is nonsense that 20,000 koalas had to burn on Kangaroo Island. It is nonsense that homes after homes after homes, elderly people have to be waiting for the fire to reach them because 8 water bombers weren't requested by an agreement that already exists. It is nonsense that only 100 of the 29,000 firefighters in the United States that could be deployed to Australia, just as Australia deployed to America when we were burning up, have not been summoned. 5 weeks ago, not now. They know each other by name. They probably have FaceTime each other. This is not an alien effort that has to be conjured out of thin air. This is an agreement at the highest levels of your government and mine, and it is in effect now. No one has to pass a law. You have the law. They foresaw the problems in 2003. The firefighters and the heads of state, and they solved it in advance, and they train and update their knowledge regularly together. These cooperative exchanges have the following objectives, right? So this is spelling out what's going to happen going forward, that there's going to be routine mutual education, routine coordination, so that there isn't a situation in which a country is burning and a head of state can say, well, I don't know if the American firefighters are going to know what to do, or I don't know if the Australian firefighters are going to know what to do. They know what to do. To share information on training, qualification, and certification systems and requirements, okay? They train on each other's systems. To share knowledge about operational procedures and systems, including ground and air operations. They know how to land planes in each other's territory. They know how to understand each other's landscapes. To observe and participate in each other's prescribed fire programs. I'm going to say that again. So having worked as a political consultant, I really want to explain that people in positions like the California Organization of Firefighters or the Environmental Minister of Canada, they can't say what the fuck is wrong with you, right? They can't say that in public. They can't. But they can't even say, look, we already participate in each other's prescribed fire programs. That's as on the ground as it gets, right? They can't say what's wrong with you. But I am telling you, and by the way, firefighters are leaking, right? Like journalists like me are getting documents, journalists like John Dee or activists like John Dee are getting, information. To observe and participate in each other's prescribed fire programs. So American firefighters are already participating in your fire programs. You're already participating in American fire programs. Everyone's participating in New Zealand fire programs. To study how each country uses firefighting equipment and apparatus, the knowledge base is already there. The unique landscape and situation, the flora and fauna of Australia are already known to the firefighters in America who have engaged with these mutual training programs. Same with New Zealand and vice versa. The firefighters who land in Northern California from Australia understand that it's a different landscape, different water tables, different animals, different methodologies. To understand how each country uses relationships at national, state, and local levels to coordinate and access firefighting resources such as volunteers. All right, this is really important. I said earlier that Australian firefighters were used as middle management to free up more American firefighters in the early 2000s. A lot of the freeing up involves dispatching or understanding how to talk to this government official or FEMA, and the same thing with Australia. So there are already American firefighters who know how the Australian volunteer fire system works, who've been trained to understand who's in charge, how these systems relate to state authority, how they relate to federal authority, if at all, what checks and balances have to be followed, who to talk to, who delivers the water, where the equipment is stored. It already happened. To share information on fire prevention education. So that's as comprehensive as a mission statement can possibly get for the situation we're in now of an absolutely catastrophic continent on fire, poisoning the air, adding a huge carbon load for the rest of the world, but devastating innocent wildlife, livestock, humans, schools, businesses, and on and on and on. And I hope that you have seen that literally none of it was necessary to this extent, because literally there are people who have been trained for 20 years, and the agreement calls on page 4 for all the assistance you need to deal with the wildfires at hand. The future. And by the way, just when you think about what's happening in Australia, I don't know if you carefully followed the North American wildfires, but they were absolutely catastrophic, but then they were managed. There was terrible devastation, but it was all hands on deck. And that's partly because there was international help. There was this agreement. We accepted it. It's not a matter of accept. It's not a matter of ego. It exists, right? And there was water, right? So it could, if our leadership, if we had been in a comparable situation, California would still be burning, you know? I don't know what else would be burning. I mean, there's a difference between a catastrophic wildfire without water and personnel and equipment sufficient to the catastrophe, and a catastrophic wildfire where all human and technological endeavor is brought to bear on it. So this is really criminal that this has not been activated, this agreement that allows for all the help. 8 water bombers, 29,000 firefighters, they aren't there because of one phone call that Scott Morrison didn't make. The future, and this is the end, through 4 mobilizations of firefighters, 3 to the US and 1 to Australia, and numerous exchange activities, these arrangements have repeatedly proven the value of having effective, flexible, cooperative, and formal relationships. These arrangements are not static, but must be periodically reviewed, adjusted, and reapproved by the signatories. The US will continue to work with its partners in Australia and New Zealand to improve and expand on these valuable relationships in order to cooperatively address the common global challenges of wildland fire management. So that's the end of this document. Again, the document was by the International Forest Fire News, IFFN number 29, July-December 2003, pages 59 to 61. International arrangements on the sharing of wildland fire suppression resources between the United States of America and Australia and New Zealand. And now I will go to the questions and comments. Let's see. I saw you post a link to, says Timothy French, I saw you post a link to a PDF of this agreement a couple of days ago on an official website. Are you now saying this has been removed? Is there a copy, or can we get a cached copy to distribute? That is a really good question. And I will need to go back to that, to where I posted that. Doing the same search, I couldn't find it. That doesn't mean that it hasn't been posted elsewhere on the internet. It doesn't mean it's vanished forever, but definitely it's a high priority to get a copy of that. And I should have saved it to my desktop, because things do vanish when they become controversial or are evidence of a major crime. I'll seek it out and I'll find it. Australia's biggest export is climate change, says Roger Brand. Jane Power says big profits will be made out of these fires. Coalition government backed by very powerful mining interests bankrolling politicians. She also says the PM knows all this, Naomi. He lies. Claims we have all the resources we need and that he has done everything possible. Won't budge on that one. Too much to gain from these fires continuing. Julian Rouse said, Julie Rouse, sorry, I've been going over all the videos to set cue points. There are many hours going back several months. I'm going through, there are a lot of links. Is there an email for me to send them to you? Yeah, that would be, Julie, thank you. You've raised a really important point. We have tiny staff and not nearly enough money to hire extra help, and have been really consumed, as we should be, by the situation in Australia here at DailyClout. So all the help you guys can give, this is your global newspaper. You're the reporters, you're the editors, you're the readers. Please put together that document with the links. And if you want to put it in a simple blog or a letter to me with the links, I'll post it on DailyClout, the website, and then I can distribute it on social media. If you know of any young people or out of work people, or people who have time and don't need to be paid, I know that's a hard thing to ask. We're desperate for more social media help to get the word out, especially about this crisis. So please send any possible DailyClout interns of whatever age, whatever abilities, to me by DMing me. We also need video editors. So please, if you have anyone who has those skills, please send them. But yes, I'm grateful to you. Please do. All right. Chris St. Prince says, can you speculate why things are not rolling out as they should? what would be the reason for this? We're not so naive as to think it's incompetence. I mean, that's such a critical question. And I am always wary about speculating, partly, that doesn't mean I'm not going to answer you, partly because the influencers who are, or reporters who are running up against vested interests or exposing something that powerful interests don't want exposed. There's now a giant Cambridge Analytica type propaganda machine that can really engage in powerful reputational attacks with real life consequences. I mean, I've been facing some of those, with some regularity. And it doesn't mean I'm going to shut up or stop reporting, but it does mean that things can get taken out of context. For instance, one of the major Australian newspapers today misreported me as having said that the ISIS beheading videos were fake. I never said that. I said that they had not been independently verified and that they were all from a single source, Site Intelligence, which has since been discredited, and no one, including the same newspaper that misreported this today, uses Site Intelligence videos or alleged primary documents anymore because they've been discredited. That's why reporters, journalism 101, you're supposed to source things with two independent confirmed sources. So if I were, having said that, I'll go ahead and answer your question and take the risk that it will be taken out of context. From everything I'm seeing, this is like, don't be distracted by speculation that he's a lunatic or a religious fanatic. He may well be, the follower of a very unusual set of religious beliefs that are extreme or even apocalyptic, but that's not, I would wager, what's driving Morrison's inaction on these catastrophic fires. It's not ego. It's not the surplus. These are fake answers, right? It's not that it's too complicated. It's not that, Australia is too proud to accept help. Everything indicates, and I'm speaking as a former political consultant, that there's some intentionality, that there's some outcome that is affected by these lands burning that we don't know yet, that has already been agreed with a buyer or with another country. If I were to, and the reason for that is, the way he is finding ways to not do the normal things any head of state, even a really bad head of state, would do under these circumstances. The thing that really tipped me off was the going to Hawaii and being unavailable while some significant things happen. And also the fact that I believe in April, a group of retired firefighters tried to warn him about this, and he refused to take a meeting with them. And I've tweeted about this, but that is a sign of what, when I worked with, political operatives, we would call deniability, right? The principal, meaning the head guy, the prime minister, the president, or the vice president, needs to be able honestly to say, I wasn't there, I didn't know, they never brought this to me, because he might be subpoenaed, and it's also for political cover. So to me, it looks like there is a reason to let these acres burn. I understand there have been some water deals. I'm not an expert at all in the relationship of water resources in Australia to other outcomes. But I gather these were big and important water deals in a water-starved Australian town, and the water is being bought by a foreign corporation. We're seeing the same thing in America, by the way. Local water tables are being bought up by Nestle and by various corporations, and it's like stealing resources. So I don't know the relationship of that to burning. I do know that the burning is a huge distraction for anything else he might want to do that the media isn't covering. But if I were to guess, the most persuasive thing I've heard, or the thing that if I had the resources to report further, I would investigate, the thing I'd encourage you to investigate, is a source who's knowledgeable about disaster capitalism said there's areas you can't mine or exploit because there are endangered species on them. If you exterminate all the endangered species and make those areas uninhabitable, you can change the zoning or the status of the land and open them up for mining or other kinds of exploitation. I'm not saying that that's what's happening, but when I heard this, that's the first time I thought, well, these otherwise bizarre absences kind of make sense, especially if there's already been a deal done. Like, I can't stress enough, as a former political consultant, and I was, advising reasonably not so horrible politicians. I was an advisor to Clinton's advisor, and I was an advisor to Gore, a wonderful, wonderful leader. But even with the good guys, I can't stress enough how first comes the deal. And then the communications department has to figure out the story to tell people to distract them from the deal, or so that they'll never ask questions about the deal. And if you reason backward, the other thing I've learned to do as a political consultant is reason backward. Like, what's the outcome? The outcome is a lot of devastated land without endangered animals on it, that no one that can be exploited in some other way. So I would really look at that, and I would assume that it's already been promised or signed over to some probably foreign interest or multinational mega interest that we don't know about. And the other possibility that also sounded like it was worth investigating, I'll put it that way, is a common practice in disaster capitalism, and this happened in Katrina, I'm sorry to say, is to let something burn or flood. There was the same question in Katrina, like, where are they? Why are people being left on rooftops? Where are the Marines? Where's the National Guard? And we were, like in Australia, disbelieving that our president was sitting it out while the city flooded and people died. What happened subsequently was that multinationals and investors swooped in and bought up formerly flooded land in the heart of the city, ruined houses that lower income people couldn't afford to keep anymore. The poor people were all moved out to these temporary accommodations, cleared out, and that land was snapped up. And, I've been to New Orleans, in the not distant past, and it's all being rebuilt with luxury developments. So you buy low, buy distressed property, and sell high. The same thing is happening with the West Bank. Remax, which is a global real estate company, is actually advertising land on the West Bank. Then there's provocative gestures that Israel makes on the West Bank. Predictably, there are uprisings, dangers, escalations. People get cleared out, and boom, a luxury development goes up. So I'm not saying that it's intentional. The other thing I want to say, and this is really hard for people to get unless it's really spelled out, a lot of things that happen at the highest levels of government are not A does B, so C happens. It's not like people are not like, a lot of evil is banal, and people don't set out to say, oh, I'll let Australia burn so my friends can mine, or so we can buy up cheap land and develop resorts along the water for people from other continents on the cheap. What usually happens is that a disaster unfolds or starts to unfold, and without even having a meeting about it, the principals realize the upside, right? If they just delay fixing it a little bit longer. It's really like insider trading. And so there's not even a conversation, right? There's not a directive. It's just like, I think it was Winston Churchill who said, never waste a good disaster, right? So it could be that these horrible things just began to unfold. There was a lot of incompetence. And then maybe, bidders started calling in, buddies of buddies, which is how it works at the highest level. It's buddies of buddies. It's never the principal, right? But word gets to the principal or word gets to the chief of staff. And it's like, just wait a week or two and it'll drive the prices down. Or wait a week or two, and that area that I know has mineral rights under it will be much cheaper than it would have been otherwise. There's also that possibility. So this is just speculation, and I really don't want you to say Naomi said. I'm just giving you background for kind of, I'm not that Naomi. She's very distinguished with disaster capitalism, but disaster capitalism is real. And I mostly what I want to stress is don't be misled or fooled by narratives of it's his religion. I see a lot of bots saying it's his religion. It's a great distraction, or, it's his ego, or he's incompetent. Donald Trump isn't incompetent. He's a lunatic. I'm trying to be nonpartisan, but he is very skillful in creating distractions and catastrophes that then result in outcomes that suit him or his oligarch friends. And right now we're in a world in which the oligarchy is global. All right, I should wrap it up soon so people can watch this. According to Max Eigen, spring-fed waterways are being blocked. That's really interesting. Georgie Bernard said, Clive Palmer made a deal. Give me my coal mine 4 times the size of Adani and I'll spend millions to get you elected. And then Georgie also said, I'm sick of trade deals being negotiated without any public debate. That is for sure. You guys in Australia, when this crisis is over, and I will help all I can, you need to refresh your transparency laws. So do we. I think we're a little further down the road of like waking up to the horror that is a looming dictatorship. So we're very aggressive again about transparency. But in Australia, there's been a systematic attack on all the ways you can find out what the hell is going on, what your government is doing. And Samantha Badams said, did you say the firefighters have contacted you about this agreement? No, I stress that I did not say that. The firefighters are leaking to various people and various journalists. How can I put it? I found that document. It's there from 2003. So, it wasn't hard to find. So I think people in a digital age have a lot of ways to leak information, and I think the firefighters are angry. And what I did do was I read carefully Cal Fire's statement about their not having been contacted to go to Australia, or not having been given the word to go to Australia. They're the Northern Californian firefighters who were helped by the Australians, and I can read from having read official communiques. I can read a little bit between the lines. They're upset and they're furious, and they're saying we want to stand with our Australian brothers and sisters who helped us. We're waiting for the call. So, but that was a public statement that they posted on Twitter. Check out Greenpeace YouTube Dirty Power. Vladimir Kolsov says, Naomi, come to Australia and join us on the streets. I would love to. I feel like right now in the middle of the crisis is not a tasteful time for me to come because it's a crisis. And I don't want to be accused of, politicizing anything, which I know I'm not, except for democracy. But it's such a delicate, sensitive time. But I'll come the minute you ask me, when it's not such an emergency. Let's see, is there anything else you guys want to bring to my attention? Has there been a statement Hi, Daisy, as to why he is not accepting help. There's been a lot of equivocation, Daisy, and I did a video that's up on YouTube calling Morrison's office, and you can hear the equivocation. It's, things are complicated. It takes time. Really nonsense. But I have to close. It's 54 minutes, and I try to not go on too long so people can share these videos and discuss them, listen to them. I mean, my heart breaks. Your hearts are breaking. I can't even imagine what it's like to be a parent or an owner of an animal, or a caretaker of an animal, or feel responsible for wilderness in Australia right now. I'm sending Australia all of my prayers for ending this catastrophe, saving all the people, all the animals, all the wildlife, as the Buddhists say, all the beings, tiny and big. And I'm going to say good night. And I'm here for you, Australia. I'm here for all of you around the world. So many millions who care about democracy and peace, and who want to build this global community that we call Team Humanity. Thank you. And remember, if you think it's important what we're doing, reading primary documents, reading the legislation, giving people in democracies a platform to amplify their voices and their concerns, we really need your help. We need to hire more editors, more social media people, more videographers to keep reporting on this catastrophe. So please, if you're outside of Australia, help us cover Australia by making a Patreon donation, by becoming a member. And if you're just in a democracy, or you want to be in a democracy, we're your newspaper. Help us, report on these issues by subscribing, and becoming members. Everything counts. And I'm going to say goodnight to you. And again, I'll keep covering Australia until the Australians tell me that they are done. Thank you so much, and have a wonderful night. It's Naomi Wolf, CEO of DailyClout. Have a safe night, Australia.